You never cut deals with jihadis. You can make an exchange, such as with the hostages, but you never cut deals. Why? It always blows up in your face.
There is a claim that Bibi Netanyahu propped up and funded Hamas.
Investing in Qatar is the worst thing one could do. All you're doing is giving them more money so they can fuel more anti-Semitic and anti-Western understandings on college campuses. Jihadis say what they mean what they say, and do it.
Welcome back to another episode of the Black and Jewish podcast. I'm so excited about this week's guest. He was my previous professor at the University of Haifa. He's a historian. He previously served in the IDF, and he is the co-founder of the Neeman Academy. Yisrael Neeman, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm so excited to finally have this conversation full circle, because the first time I interviewed you was in 2016 at the University of Haifa when I was taking your terrorism and response classes there for my first time living in Israel and studying abroad. And, we had that beautiful backdrop view, and fast forward 10 years later, and now we're here on the Black and Jewish podcast.
That's great.
So I want to talk to you about global jihad. What is the jihad, and what is the mission and goal of jihad?
Okay. So global jihad is the movement to capture the entire world in the name of Islam. We're speaking here jihadi Islam, even though if we go back 200-300 years, that was the classical understanding that you had in Islam. There have been changes since, call it the mid-19th century. Won't get into those. But this is the idea. It's been rebooted that everybody must either become a Muslim or live under Islam. And it involves conquest, coercion. But first, there's the issue of persuasion. If you can persuade people, especially those who are from non-Abrahamic religions, to convert to Islam, they should. And then you can convince Jews and Christians who have a special sort of place in Islam as what's called dhimmi, or subject peoples. And they can remain in their religions, but they will not be equal. But the overall idea is total conquest of the world, one way or another.
Is this a tenet of the Quran, or is this, a certain group misconstruing the Quran?
Okay. So no, they're not misconstruing. They're not misconstruing the Quran. Okay. Not at all. Because this is how Muhammad in the Arabian Peninsula unified the Arabian Peninsula by converting the pagan tribes, and there would be a declaration of war if they did not convert. He would give them warning, and if not, he would attack and force them to convert or destroy. Jews who were there and Christians were also warned, and some of them were totally destroyed, like one of the Jewish tribes in Medina, the Beni Koreza, where all the men were executed and women and children forced into Islam. Now, it spread all the way out to India, captured Hindustan under the same principles, the same understandings, as well as captured the southern part of the Byzantine Empire, across North Africa, and eventually the rest of the Byzantine Empire and into the Balkans, and then even Spain and Portugal, right? The Iberian Peninsula. And it's Quran, it's in understanding in the Hadiths, in other words, the traditions, and that is the objective. And if we look, for instance, at Muslim Brotherhood writings, it's exactly what they speak of. You look at Hamas, the covenant there, that's what they speak of. Nobody hides it. And you can go online and Instagram, whatever else, and see all these videos, wherever, that the imams, they speak about it. This has to be rebooted, and you have to capture the world. It was started again in full force with Hassan al-Banna when he established the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. And from there, went through different theologians and thinkers, were eventually solidified itself in Afghanistan in the 1980s in the war against the Soviets. And from there has spread all over, 9/11 being part of this. And of course, jihadi battles throughout the world. We're familiar with them in particular in the Middle East, but also, look, the most violent, vicious, we speak of Nigeria, Boko Haram, speak of Al-Shabaab in Somalia, we speak of what goes on in Sudan, and of course, we've had plenty in North Africa, as I said, and the Middle East, and challenges, even like in southern Philippines. Okay, so it's there.
When we're talking about jihad and Islamists, I know you and I have talked a lot about reform Muslims and moderate Muslims. Do Muslims as a whole adopt this idea of jihad as in the actual definition, or even as the actual practice in which you're saying where it's total conquest? And what's the difference between a moderate Muslim or a reformed Muslim?
Okay, excellent question, because that's where always the issues are. It's not a problem to talk about extremists or fanatics, right? Like the Islamic State Caliphate, where they really destroyed everything and slaughtered people. So let's say nowadays, the average Muslim in the West would not be identified as what's called an Islamist, which I call a jihadi. I think Islamism, it's used as a political term. I think we really have to be careful. Say it's jihadi Islam.
Quickly, can you just define the difference between a jihadist and an Islamist?
Okay.
Just for the viewers.
Okay, for the viewers. Mm-hmm. So in Islamist, it's political Islam, wanting to have Islam as a political program in order to influence and then, yes, take over society. And the first step when people speak about it is that it will be done democratically. You'll convince people to go that way. That's when I spoke previously about persuasion as opposed to coercion. What people don't look at that with the Islamism as a political ideal, that Islam should rule society, is that if it doesn't work using persuasion, yes, it's meant to go over to coercion. When I speak of jihadi Islam, I'm already at the second side of that, where it is coercion, meaning using military force, what is called jihad of the sword, or the sword verse, which is chapter 9, verse 5. You have your jihadi chapters 8 and 9. There's plenty of other mentions of jihad of the sword, right? A full conquest. Now, we go back to the original part of the question of do we look at people in the West, Muslims in the West, and how do we see them? Look, there are those for sure who would be in favor of jihad of the sword, and they may speak of Islamism now, but they really would go that direction. My belief is, from what I could see, public opinion surveys, the majority aren't there. But the majority, they're not the ones who change history. It's the small, determined, ideologically, theologically committed who will stop at nothing, who change history. And I don't care which people it is or where it's been in the world. Think of all the revolutions, okay? And it could be for good, it could be for bad. And here it would be very dangerous. Now, to differentiate between them and the
moderate reform.
Right. Okay. The full jihadis is those are the ones who are going to go for it, like Islamic State Caliphate or like Al Qaeda types, whatever, that they don't think about persuading. It's just everything's coercion. Okay. So there's nuance here and where you are on the spectrum. Now, when you speak of reformists and moderates, and here it gets sticky, very sticky, because often we think of someone as a moderate because they'll say something like, well, everybody has the right to the opinion. And no, we're not doing anything like that now. I'm just here to try to, like in the democratic framework, to convince you on and on. And then you'll ask the question, but in the end, does everybody have to bend a knee to Islam? Or is there pluralism? That's my question always. Is there pluralism, or do we have to go by Sharia law as in the Quran? There you can differentiate between someone who says they're a moderate, but their ultimate goal is capturing the world for Islam, or someone who is pluralistic, who will say, no, like in the Emirates, right? The UAE. So everybody has their religion, everybody has their nationalism. You can believe what you want. We have no intention of forcing anybody to do anything.
But the Quran itself, does it encourage having a pluralistic society? Meaning, I had a friend say, if a Muslim is not a jihadi, or like he doesn't really believe that moderates exist, and he says that if a Muslim is not technically an extremist, it's because they are not actually practicing their own Quran. Like they're not really reading and practicing it to its fullest. Would you say that's true or
Yes.
wrong?
Yes. He was very honest. This person was very honest with you.
He's an ex-Muslim who said
Right.
this.
Okay. Fine. By the way, the ex-Muslims will say that because when they read it and they read it in depth, they say, wait a minute, I don't want this. I have a lot of, I live in the Central Galilee in Israel. And here, Jews are 50%, right, of all the Galilee. Jews are 50% and Arabic speakers, the other 50%, of which the vast majority are Muslims. And when I speak with people I'm associated with, there's a lot of Muslims, have association with, and I discuss these things, they don't know the Quran. I said, it says this, that. He goes, no, I don't read that. I have my holidays. And, so they're not connected into it. But someone who goes in depth and believes it, yes, that's why these people say, wait a minute, I want a democratic, pluralistic society. And we find that they end up converting to Christianity in general because Jesus is a prophet in Islam. But to get to that, to the reformers, and here I believe there can be hope. Reformers will tell you, we've got to get rid of this jihad of the sword idea. Done with it. We don't want any more wars. We don't want any more bloodshed. We want to get along with Jews and Christians and those who don't believe at all, right? Can be an atheist or an agnostic or Buddhist or Hindu. It makes no difference. They say, just let's live. Those are the reformers, and they're under some pretty brutal attack. Lots of attacks.
Does Islam have a mechanism the same way in Judaism we have a mechanism to make a law or I don't want to say make a law, but make an ordinance or make a, we can change things through our Sanhedrin in the past, and or even if we need to change something for a communal thing, we have this mechanism of law that we could do that. Do they have that same mechanism?
Okay. So once again, a very penetrating question. I thank you for it. The mechanism is in essence there, at least theoretically.
Okay.
Because you had what was known as abrogation or nullification. The Quran is a work that clashes with itself. It's at war with itself, and it's Irshid Manji, right? Who the great Muslim reformer, she calls herself a refusenik in a way. All right. She wrote some 20 years ago about this, a book about with the problem with Islam today. And she says, look, we have to emphasize the moderate verses in the Quran. Now, the Quran breaks down pretty much into two. There are the verses from the year 610 to 622 when Muhammad and a small group of followers lived in Mecca. And they were getting along until 622 and they had to leave. There was a clash. We don't need to go into it. But they were open, more pluralistic, and they accepted others and others accepted them until this clash. They went to Medina and then it became very hard line. So what happened is the previous pluralistic understandings, ideas were abrogated or nullified later on by Islamic scholars because they were very successful in what's called the 1,000-year jihad, where they captured massive territories, 1/3 of the known world, pretty much. Okay.
Yes.
So I have presented, right? You have my book, right? Chapter 9, that there can be reverse abrogation. And there are those who don't exactly use that terminology. I'm talking about Muslims and ex-Muslims, right? The reformers, of course, that say, yes, it's there in the Quran. It's been abrogated. Why can't we go back? Abrogate jihad and accept pluralism. The problem with it, it's been pointed out, of course, many times, is you need Islamic scholars to do that, not just the reformers who are considered outside of the framework or outside of the mainstream, because they really are the rebels.
The reformers are the rebels.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They're rebelling, and when many of them end up leaving Islam, but those who remain are really have an uphill battle.
And just for a bit of clarification, when we say reformed, are they still practicing religious Muslims? Because I know when we say reform as Jews, it means something different. They're not a practicing Jew or even religious, but are these reformed Muslims still religious and very much still practicing the religion, or like how are they religiously?
Okay, I believe that would be more like an individual question per, per person, persona.
Okay.
There are those. What's his name? Tawhili, who's a reformist cleric in Australia, that he is an imam, and he
Okay.
argues we've got to stop this. And he studied in Iran under the Ayatollahs and came
Wow.
to the conclusion that this is a bad idea, but I want to reform Islam. Many others, from what I can tell, okay, have, so they have a holiday here and there. In other words, kind of like reform with the Jews, or just sort of abandon it. And as an individual solution, abandoning is one thing, but if we want to solve the problem in its entirety, the reforms are going to have to come from within, right? Muslims saying, listen, this doesn't work. Look what has happened. Look at all the wars and destruction in the Islamic world. And most of them, by the way, are caused by internal conflict. And yes, there are conflicts, whether it be, with Israel or in Nigeria, right? There are Christians there, or other parts throughout the world that have been and are now. So
So it's not
it begs the
something we
question.
as Westerners can come from the outside and really fight jihad in terms of changing ideology.
Okay. So that's also a point that is made quite often. And I myself have been a bit careful saying, I know that we from the outside can't really do it, but obviously planting the seeds. And where I see that our function is to make this clear to those who don't know this topic. Jews and Christians who are not familiar, or atheists, doesn't matter. Those who are neither Muslim nor non-Muslims that are acquainted with jihad, and say, look, you see all the destruction, you see what's going on, you see the disaster. Don't we all want to have a better world? Well, it's not going to be by supporting jihad and extremist theologies, because not an ideology, it's theology. That's a problem. Because ideologies are more flexible, right? Because they're human made. So that's where I say our job is, and then those from the inside, Muslims, can help change it. Certainly pressures from the outside would not hurt. Pressures towards peace. Because I'm not talking about pressures towards doing something that's dangerous. I'm talking about pressures towards having a much better world.
Talk to me about the Red-Green Alliance. What is that alliance?
Okay. So the Red-Green Alliance that we see on campuses and academia and even in civil society, I'll start with the green. The green are those Islamists, jihadis, like Hamas and others, right, supporting them, who believe fully in world conquest. They'll start with persuasion and then move over towards coercion. Now, they're not yet using fully coercion in the West, because you have to go to war. But you do have some of it, of course, when you look at terrorist attacks.
Okay.
On the campuses, it is packaged as part of a liberation movement. Now, if we get into those who are very dedicated to Islam, they say, surrender to Allah, to the Sharia law. That is all liberation. I am liberated by living by Sharia law. You now take, all right, so that's actually pretty simple, but they believe in world conquest and that you have to do what's written in the Quran, which of course means Jews, Christians are not equal. By the way, women aren't either. And, but that's what God wants, Allah wants, and that's it. Now, it gets a little more complicated with the Red Alliance, because when we speak of the red part of it, we're talking of Marxism. Now, let me just digress a second back to the green. When we speak of traditional, right, this Islamic jihad understanding, the greatest enemy are the Jews. Going back in the history, right, they say that is sort of the ones who rejected Islam, like saying an antichrist. Okay, let's go to the red, Marxism. And they're speaking of equality and liberation, and we're all together and we all work together, on and on. But they do not advocate democracy, and we know jihadi Islam or Islamism is totally against democracy. They are also against democracy. We know that there are those who spoke of the dictatorship of the proletariat or of the workers and representing the people. But it's always a question, who represents the people? Well, those of us who know better, we saw what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution, Stalinist Russia, on and on. You don't have any communist societies which are pluralistic, nor do you have pluralism amongst the Greens, amongst the Islamists, right? There's no pluralism there. So Marx, when he wrote his early essays, also capitalism equaled Judaism in his essay on the Jewish question. And the Jews were the number one enemy, Judaism. But how do you have Judaism without Jews? So the idea was that Jews should get rid of their entire identity and just be a person. Everybody else can have an identity, but not Jews, right? And then you'll get rid of Judaism, which is capitalism, which is oppressive, and which, of course, represents empire or represents, eventually be spoken about, right? 20th century and on, colonialism, the Western democracies, on and on. So the Reds and the Greens together, they have two major enemies. One, the Jews, and it's there from the very outset. When Marx wrote that essay, I think he was only 27 years old, right? And we know that early Islam in the Arabian Peninsula, the Jews were the first enemy. So you start off that the Jews are the enemy, and then you go into this framework by the Reds of capitalism and trying to control the world. And who are the capitalists? Well, Soviet Union, the Jews are behind the capitalism, right? You just go back to Marx's writing. Plus, they were called rootless cosmopolitans who have no loyalties to anybody or anything, just money. I'll take it a step further. If you want to politicize it completely and put the glue to it, go back to the famous Tsarist forgery, the vicious anti-Semitic forgery known as Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which accused the Jews of controlling the world. Hitler put that into Mein Kampf, where it became even more famous. So now it's a red, green, and fascist Nazi alliance. They're all together. It's just that people don't speak about the fascist Nazi part of it because it's, at the moment, not particularly, I guess, politically correct. But I believe you'll see where the Klan and others will say, why can't we march on campus also against Israel, Jews, whatever else? We're saying the same thing because they, in essence, if you were to make the beginning of a triangle and then put making an A and putting a bar in the middle, that's the fascist Nazism. So together, Jews are seen as the emissaries of the colonial, racist, fascist, whatever empires that are represented by Western democracy, and Jews are accused of supporting Western democracies. The truth is, the vast majority of Jews do support Western democracy because it's pluralistic and allows Jews to have full expression.
Right.
Okay? So, I mean, there's more to it. I could go into a little bit of a tirade.
I know. I just want to circle back to the Bolsheviks because at least in the small corner of conservatives on Elon Musk's Twitter, it's that the Bolsheviks were ran by Jews, the leadership was Jewish, etc., and the Jews were so responsible of killing all of these Christians. So can you give us the actual historical landscape of the Bolsheviks and what was happening there and just, the actual basic information of that time?
Okay, good. I'll go back to something I studied a few decades ago and spent years.
Yeah, we just had to put a little nail in that coffin quickly for I want people, if they're on the opposite side, to at least know this part of history because that is just circling the internet.
Okay, so first of all, there were Jews who supported the Bolshevik Revolution. Remember, they were supporting it as the Reds and believing many of them were just socialists, like social democrats. Okay, like the Democratic Party in America or a Labor Party. And it was against what was known as the whites, the Tsar, even though they were also amongst those viciously anti-Semitic types. They were known as the Black Hundreds that supported the Tsar. And there were massacres of Jews during the Bolshevik Revolution. In July of 1920, 60,000 Jews were killed in 1 month in the Don River Basin, Ukraine area.
Wow.
Okay? People forget that. So, of course, the Jews are not going to side with those who are slaughtering them. Now, they were very anti-religious and anti-Semitic, right? When the Reds get into power, or you'd say the Bolsheviks, they're not treating the Jews much better. Now, their leadership. Trotsky was Jewish, but he was not against Jews, because many times you have Jews turn on their own people in such circumstances. I mean, I could give names, but forget it. We don't need to do that now. Trotsky said, I don't favor any one group. We all going to become the new Soviet man. He would be forced out by Stalin. Zinoviev and Kamenov were 2 Jews who were also in the leadership cadre, and they were purged by Stalin as well. Stalin was horribly anti-Semitic, and he destroyed the Jewish leadership framework within the ethnic community, right? Go to the purges in 1936 to 38, and all the accusations made. The percentage of Jews in those who were purged from 36 to 38 is unbelievable. Churchill writes about it. Others do as well. Said they're purging internally, and almost everybody's Jewish. The Jews were known as the opposition, Trotsky, those who supported him. And the hint was that the Jews are the opposition. Now, there was what was called the Orthodox opposition, the same word as Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Church. So it was like a legitimate opposition, but the Jews are the opposition, which is not legitimate. So you can eliminate them. They ended up in Siberia, died. After World War II, Stalin concocted what was known as the doctor's plot, okay, where he accused Jewish doctors of, or 9 doctors, 6 of whom were Jewish, of conspiring to kill off the Soviet leadership. Now, during the war, he eliminated a lot of those in the party that he felt were threatening his position. He didn't have answers as why they suddenly disappeared. But he said, we found these doctors, they treated them. And that's why it happened. These doctors were arrested in 1952 and tortured or whatever else. In the end, there wasn't any trial because Stalin died before it could happen. But he was planning what was known as the 1/3 operation. 1/3 Jews to expel to Siberia, 1/3 to forcibly assimilate, and 1/3 to kill off. That's what we understand. But the plan
As
never
a
came
historian, do you think that is it the strategy of these jihadis to put out into the internet this idea that, you know, all of us were taught history wrong because now they're, you know, at least online, I'm talking about social media online, there's talks about how Churchill was worse than Hitler, this new story about the Bolsheviks and what was really happening in the Holocaust, and all of these stories trying to pop out which they want to go against the traditional narrative? Or do you think it's just that maybe there were some facts that people didn't learn as children, like there were Jews who were in the leadership of the Bolsheviks, but that does not mean the Jewish people were out, you know, slaughtering Christians. So I'm trying to understand and have the viewers understand that they don't need to fall into conspiracy theories per se. There could be parts of history that maybe you just didn't know about, but it doesn't lead into this larger conspiracy about the Jewish people.
Correct. Okay, so here, we know there were Jews who were in the top leadership. They got removed. And that's part of the story. They wanted a full revolution because they wanted to be fully equal. The whole idea of the Bolshevik Revolution was to be equal, not to be persecuted as a Jew, which was under the czars. And it didn't really help because Stalin became the new czar. And we shouldn't deny it, no. But to take something like that and to build a whole theory about it, completely wrong. Take a look at who was being persecuted, the Jews more than anybody else. And even after Stalin, in the 50s, in the 60s, into the 70s, and until the Soviet Union fell apart, the Jews were the ones who suffered the most of the different ethnic groups. Yes, there were others who suffered a lot, Ukrainians and some of those in the Muslim republics, but the Jews, it was constant, and they had their history religion, everything shorn from them, taken away to become a non-entity. That was the whole idea, right? And become part of the new Soviet man. Because the Jews were outside of their homeland, it was very hard for them to hold on, right? Being in your own physical homeland helps a lot more, but you don't have history books. Religion is suppressed. Where are you getting your traditions from?
Right.
So the worst thing is when they take a few small facts that are correct and spin it into something that's an entire theory.
Right.
The Jews did not, as a group, oppress anybody. There were Jews who were in the administration, like every other ethnic group there. And those Jews, like Lev Kaganovich, for instance, persecuted the Jews worse than anybody else. Okay, just to prove that they were loyal. And that also, when we speak of great Jewish traitors in our history, we find that when they join the other side, there are those who will go to persecute Jews more than anyone else to prove that they're kosher, so to speak. All right, it sounds ridiculous, but to show that they're part of the system and we're with you. We'll destroy our own people. And all right, I'm not that familiar with the Elon Musk, but yes, with the conspiracy theories and all that.
Not him specifically. I'm just saying, like, he owns Twitter, and Twitter is just going crazy right now. So just to go back a little bit to the Red Green Alliance and our college campuses and the funding that's happening on our college campuses here in the U.S., what is it that young people, they're just missing it on these college campuses? And when I studied the Israeli-Arab conflict, and I zoomed out a little bit, I was like, oh, this was not just about, Jews wanting to come back, return to their homeland, and Arabs being upset and thinking that, this piece of land was called Palestine. Like when you zoom out, it's like, it's really about Arabs wanting conquest over that whole region and them fighting against Western values and Western empires, the British, France, etc. And, we see that Egypt starts to align with the Soviet Union at some point, etc. And it wasn't really about just this piece of land, but more so about the ideology that they wanted and to be in that region. And like you said before, I remember we had a conversation of like the Turkish Empire falling, and now they could revitalize that area. And so I think that at least students in America don't understand that it's not just about Israelis and Palestinians. It's really about our values versus their values, Western values versus their values, and making sure that we stay a strong empire and what we value stays rooted and grounded in what we value. Because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone in America could even handle a world where we came under jihad or where we were a country that was an Islamic country, even if it was moderate per se.
Right. Okay. So the very end of what you said, I think it would be very difficult for Westerners because you would not be equal. And women in particular, even if you are Muslim. Okay. The Quran actually allows for a husband to physically discipline his wife. Chapter 4, verse 34. Or says about going into she's like your fields. You go in and seed when you want. Chapter 2, verse 223. And there are other things, okay? So I don't think that that's what people would particularly want. They just simply don't know. As for, what was the main point you were making there of the question? About what
the students and like not understanding what they're like maybe understanding what they're supporting, and
Okay, so we'll address that. Look, one of the things that is said from the beginning, the students, is that Israel's, quote, this colonial entity.
Right.
Okay. Wait a minute. So because we worked with the British Empire, we tried working with the Turks first, and they realized, the Sultan realized in the meetings, Herzl, but others, that yes, there's something to it. The Quran says that the lands east and west, as part of the covenant, belonged to the Israelites, right? The Jews. That got nullified or abrogated. There's lots of standing behind the covenant that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. It's all nullified. Why? Because the understanding.
But this is all written in the Quran.
Yeah, I'll send you the quotes. Okay, but they got nullified, abrogated. So what came about afterwards was the understanding that any land ever captured by Islam belongs to Islam forever. It's called defensive jihad. So that includes, of course, Israel. It includes Spain and Portugal. It includes the Balkans. It includes lots of areas worldwide. India, okay, it's enormous, 1.4 billion people. Okay, so it's not just here, but they focused here. And what's really a bit stunning is that here you have an indigenous people going back home. Yeah, we've been scattered all over the world. So what? So it's not like, how should we put it, that we all look the same, right? We're not all blonde hair, blue eyes, or, look Middle Eastern or Ethiopian, from Africa, which Yemenite, we've been scattered for so long and people married in and whatever else, okay? But we still held on to it. And what really galls them is that after 2,000 years of exile, we had the audacity to come back and build a successful country. Now, let's move back a bit because we want to talk about legitimacy. Well, that's great, succeed or whatever. But the legitimacy here is recognized. You go into Christian sources, go into Romans, right? And you have this in the New Testament, right? The Christian scriptures. It talks about, right, Jews and to be forgiven and whatever else. And it's very well understood, right? This land is Jewish or Judean, right? You can go into with the Quran, but I mentioned also the covenant. Remember, Christians also accept the Old Testament. So when we talk about the whole framework here, there's sort of like an overall denial. And it can really, how should we put it? It denies the Jewish national liberation movement of Zionism. Everybody has the right to be in their homeland and have independence. Only the Jews don't. Because you go back to the original anti-Semitism, it came out of Islam, right? Comes out much of Christianity, all right? Even though there's been a correction on that in recent years, as well as the Reds, which saying, as far as the world order, socioeconomically, the Jews are the bad guys. That Judaism is capitalism. So wherever you look, the Jews are made into this out group that everybody has all these rights except for the Jews. Okay? And that's outright anti-Semitism.
Right. Okay, let's move on to what's happening present day with Trump, with the Qataris, with Israel and the war, etc. You said something to me that I thought was very powerful. I won't say it as great as you said it, but basically that we cannot convince or negotiate with jihadists based on like material wealth or financial well-being, and that is something the West continues to make a mistake on. We think that if we pursue economic prosperity, then we can bring peace. Can you talk about that piece?
For sure. Now, the problem
you had a great quote. I can't remember the quote, but you can tell us about not negotiating. I forgot the quote.
Well, no, you never cut deals with jihadis. You can make an exchange, such as with the hostages, but you never cut deals. Why? It always blows up in your face. It has to. It's part of the theology. Once again, it's not an ideology that you can break with it. If you break with the theology, you're going to go to hell. So you may as well, leave or become a reformer or whatever else. Okay. Now, Trump is considered like the rest of the West in the eyes of jihadi Islam or the Islamists. They're philosophical materialists. They believe that material aspects rule the world, meaning that, let's call it the liberals left, will give lots of aid to Islamic countries and those who are having problems, whatever else. They're going to take it and just strengthen, if you're speaking of countries that are very, very, that are quite religious and believe in jihad, you're just strengthening them. You're coming towards them. And if you can do the same thing in a capital incentive environment, investing in Qatar is the worst thing one could do. All you're doing is giving them more money so they can fuel more anti-Semitic and anti-Western understandings on college campuses, allowing them to invest.
It's not going to bring about peace in the Middle East to give more money.
No. It may be temporary because they don't want to stir it up. See, we haven't done anything 5 years, 10 years, 15. The ultimate objective is the jihad. We in the West are reflexive. We believe that, okay, I'm deterred, you're deterred. But they have another aspect. A friend of mine coined the term delayance. There is no deterrence. It's delayance. It's just put off until the right moment. In the meantime, what you have is a pause, a hudna, which is not a Western ceasefire to achieve mutual recognition and peace and borders and to get along. But a hudna is there in order to rearm, re-strengthen yourself, reorganize, and restart at the moment of the choosing of the Islamists / jihadis. And they'll choose the time when it has to be. So what bin Laden actually said, I was just read this morning, that he said, Americans or the West worships wealth, money, something like that. And they're mistaken in believing everybody else does as well. Okay. And that's in a nutshell, because what they say is we worship the true God and way, right? Allah and Islam. And it's only a tool, these material aspects, because the objective is to convert the world, and that we can't leave the jihad, because if we do, we go to hell. The idea is an eternal heaven.
So at the end of the day, I know you said this earlier, but there's no way to actually fight this theology unless it comes from the inside.
Okay. So I'll give you three points of the three-pronged program. First of all, the Americans in the West, in Iraq, for the most part, okay? There's also stuff in Syria, or the Russians where there are more. There's degrade and destroy. That's what was used to get rid of the Islamic State Caliphate, ISIL. And you degrade, right, on a physical level, and then destroy, right? Eventually, and we know what Mosul looked like in the end. But they're very, very tenacious. You had 4,000 to 5,000 men fighting 100,000. It took jihadis, right? 4,000 to 5,000. It took 9 months to defeat them. But the aftermath is where the West keeps making a mistake, because then you have to discredit. You have to discredit jihadi Islamism. Even when it's put over, oh, well, we're just having a conversation, I'd like to convince you. No, you're 100% wrong. Everybody has a right to their value system and what they think it to express it. You have the right to express it. You don't have the right to incitement against Jews, Christians, or anybody else. And no, when you say, yes, we're going to declare a war on you, it's a question. Okay, is this incitement? How far have you gotten? Have you taken action? But the West has to be very clear. We can all have our agreements and disagreements. You do not incite. If you want someone to try to convince them to join Islam, fine. No incitement. But that's always what stands behind it. It's like, a fist in a velvet glove, right?
Right.
Someone's going to hit you, but it looks, it's only velvet. Okay.
Right.
And therefore,
I think that saying is like that iron hand, but in a velvet glove.
Yeah, could be.
Yes.
My English has escaped me over the years. So.
No, it's okay.
Some of it. No, it's okay. It's okay. But that's the idea. And it must be discredited, and through education. It took decades for this jihad education to infiltrate in America. And it was well planned out starting in the early 90s when they went to undermine the Oslo Accords and the two-state solution and the acceptance of others in the Middle East, not just Israel. If you think about the Christian communities that have been banished from the Middle East, you talk about ethnic cleansing, Christians more than anybody else, from World War I through to where we are today, 100 some odd years. Okay, Jews ended up not being banished from the Middle East, but from virtually all the countries, and congregated in Israel for the most part.
Right.
Okay, so what we have to make very clear is that the red line is very early on. When you start advocating for Islam, know your Quran, right? Those of us that say, wait a minute, what about this quote? What about that quote? What about this in Islamic history? What about the tens of millions of Hindus who were slaughtered? What about the slave trade in Africa, which was larger than what happened in the West, which is an unbelievable disaster? It was worse. People to say I shouldn't compare.
And we still have slaves there.
That's right. Sudan didn't outlaw slavery until like supposedly 2005, and even now it's very flexible, right? What goes on in South Sudan, or even with Muslims who are in Darfur, or look at Boko Haram, what they do to the Christian population, right? The girls who were abducted some 10 years ago, right? It's still there. It's still there, right? And look at the way Indians, Pakistanis are treated when they work in some of the Gulf areas, Gulf states, right? Instances there. So, by the way, Saudi Arabia only outlawed slavery in 1962, and it continued quite a bit. Mauritania in 1981, Sudan 2005, and we know it continues in many places, right? And this people don't know.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, our students need a lot more education because they're so busy speaking about colonialism and imperialism, at least where it comes from the West, but never speaking about the Arab conquest and the Arab slave trade, and that it lasts so much longer, like up until recent years, and like we said, up until today.
Okay, so you can rewrite history by starting history at the end of World War I. Sykes-Picot, the French and British, these are the bad guys. Now, before that, the British were also involved in the Middle East, but let's remember something. It was the great rollback. Islam under the Turks, okay? And I don't say the Arabs, right? Under the Turks. Moved all the way up to Vienna. The last siege of Vienna was in 1683, and it was halted.
Wow.
It was halted on the 12th of September, 1683. That's why September 11th is a date to be remembered. Why September 11th? That was the last day that the Islamists, the jihadis, had the upper hand against the West. And hence, you have 9/11. Okay? It's very, very symbolic. Okay? But this is the rollback. They were winning for 1,000 years, except they lost Spain and Portugal, and more than 1,000 years against the Hindus. Nobody asked what's the history of Hindu suffering under Islamic jihad. And by the way, numbers-wise, they suffered more than anybody else. I mean, as someone who's Jewish and knew a lot of Western history, I got to that, I was in shock. Not only that, I had students at the Technion where I teach, engineering students, PhDs, post-PhDs, astrophysicists, saying, but you don't know Hindu history. You're teaching, when you talk about the Middle East, you should learn what we're doing. And then I went and really investigated. So, whoa. Okay? So why don't we teach about India, the subcontinent, the oppression that had been there? Why not about Africa, East Africa in particular?
Yeah.
Why not about what happened in the Balkans? What happened to the Christian countries of the Balkans? Right? We can go on and on. It's like history starts with World War I. So you eliminated memory, right? All the memory you eliminate. And they say, oh, they've always been the bad guys. No, they rolled them back. And then left, right? Less than 100 years, they quote colonialists here, much less. End of World War II, into the 60s, they're gone from here. The Turks had this empire 400 years. And before them, there were others, right? Especially.
What do you think is going to be the day after the war in Gaza? Right now, everyone is accusing Israel of ethnic cleansing, and that we will ethnically cleanse out 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. But what do you think will actually happen? Do you believe Israel will take over Gaza? Do you believe that Israel just wants to, quote unquote, expand its borders?
Okay. So here we need a bit of history also. Trifle. Let's remember something. In 1956, in the war with Egypt, Israel captured Gaza and then left.
Yes.
Okay? After a few months. Then after 67, when Israel had these agreements with the Palestinian Authority, in 2 steps we left during the Oslo Accords, and then afterwards the disengagement was unilaterally Israel left. Okay, so it's not like Israel wanted to have Gaza officially or whatever. You have people that talk that way. Now, when we look at it today, after the Hamas attack, questions come up. How do we make sure this never happens again? Remember, Hamas overthrew the Palestinian Authority in 2007. It was an overthrow. The Islamists took regime control from the Palestinian Authority, which was a semi-state, but still was secular nationalist, at least in what they would express outwardly. Yeah, plenty of people there were traditionalists, but they throw them out. The government that was elected, okay, and their police force. They built the whole tunnel system and an enclave built on jihadi understandings and essentially was a mini-state. It had Sharia law, was the law, starting in December 2008. Now, once Yahya Sinwar got out, working also with the Iranians and others, right, they built a tunnel system. We had several clashes that went on from 2008-9 all the way until finally 7th of October. From that period on, Israel's been fighting 600 days now, exactly.
Yeah.
What is Israel's plan afterwards? And I'll say it outright, and I've written about it plenty. We don't have a day after plan, something I personally believe needs to be. I don't see personally where there's such a tremendous problem of working with the moderate Arab states, not Qatar, and the Europeans and the Americans, and that we have dealing with security. Okay, put that aside. Now, is there ethnic cleansing? The answer is no, because people would have to leave the enclave completely. You have internally displaced. People like to mess up, with the terminology. But internally displaced is very different, meaning that people can go back. Now, there's a lot of wreckage there. There's no doubt. The vast majority of buildings, infrastructure, because of what happened, and the whole tunnel system, it's terrible. I don't think anybody can say no. But that doesn't mean that people are going to be expelled. There are some extremists who say that.
Displaced.
Right?
Yes.
That? They're displaced.
I said they'll just be displaced.
In the meantime. Now, the question is, will they go back? What's that? Okay.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Is, yeah, I can hear it. The question is whether they go back. And now you're talking the day after, and do I believe that they'll be allowed back? Now, there is the Trump plan where he talks about that they will be sent to different Arab countries. None of those countries have accepted. Question is amongst the Gazans, how many of them would want to leave? We don't know. We know there could be a fair amount. Look, the situation is really pretty dire in many cases. But what's spoken about is
where do you think they would go? Do you think Jordan would take them, Egypt, or no. Are we looking at European countries?
Okay. So none of the Arab countries want this. I don't believe the European countries, even those that are the most pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, like Ireland, Norway, and Spain, would take them either. I don't think so. So I don't really believe there are many options here. You'll have a few thousand that leave, and they talk about people who want to leave willingly can go. Well, that's always been sort of the idea. Anybody who wants to leave any place should be able to go, right? Now, it's just a matter of the country that's willing to take them in. If there aren't any, so then you sort of have to wait. In the meantime, like I said, Israel does not have a plan. And personally, I believe, as I said before, that working with Europe, United States, and Israel dealing with the security, that the rebuild. But on the civilian level, Hamas cannot come back. What has happened over the last 600 days is that whoever hands out the food still deals with the civilian administration. That's who you're going to have your loyalties to. So they got to be replaced. Now, the Trump administration has started doing that, coordination with Israel with handing out food. We'll see where it goes. Right?
What do you think the future of Trump and the administration and the relationship to Israel and Netanyahu? People are saying they don't. Some people are reporting Trump and Netanyahu are on great terms. There's nothing to worry about or to fear. And others are saying that Trump and Netanyahu are not on great terms and Israel is going to be left on its own. And we don't know what the future of the American-Israel allyship is going to look like. What's your take on that?
Okay. So, yes, there are conflicting reports on both sides. I would say this. From what I could tell, the Americans are disappointed. They thought that Israel would finish the war earlier. But without a day after plan, it's not really happening. There's also a lot of criticism what went on in the military, but their plans have to be approved by the government. The war has gone far too long. There are many generals now on radio and TV saying this could have ended a year ago, certainly a half year ago. Okay. Now, Trump, his administration is aware of such things, and he wants to end wars because he does have the global capitalist approach of let's invest, and investment will bring about peace.
When they said the war could have ended a year ago or a half a year ago, what missteps did Israel take that makes them feel like, on our part, that the war is being prolonged, or it's been prolonged because of which mistakes?
Okay, so it's more of a theology, or people call it an ideology, that you have the right wing in the government, very hardline right wing, two political parties, one the National Religious, the other one Jewish Power, called Otzma Yehudit, that believe in the greater land of Israel. And if you allow a civil authority in that would hand out the food and start taking over civil administration, it's an admittance that Israel is not going to rule there. Meaning that we know Gaza is part of the greater land of Israel, understanding, just look in Hebrew scriptures, right, in the Old Testament, and they say theologically we have to be there. Netanyahu would look at it that if he can't keep them in the government, his government would fall because nobody in the opposition would join him. So he continues with it without saying that's exactly what he's doing, while at the same time not speaking about any sort of annexation. That he's not going to do. I don't think he particularly wants it, but he can't come out and say he doesn't want it. He can't come out and say that he does want it. So we're in this intermediate stage. How you would remove support for Hamas if someone else hands out food, clothing, shelter and rebuilding areas that have been cleansed of terrorists, whatever else, and, the Nukhba, the Hamas, and say, now, for instance, the Amorites, the Sauds, were saying, we accept having peace with Israel, right? We know the Amorites have Abraham Accords. No Qataris. Okay? Because that would lead towards, a reboot. And that's not been done. And therefore it comes down politically, right? Whoever, when you're in a dire situation, food, clothing, shelter, the basics, you'll give your loyalty to that person. Look, hardline jihadis won't. But the average person who was brought up this way or that way could say, listen, that's what I have to do for my family. Let's see where it goes. And they could still remain traditional, right? It's not 100%, but it certainly makes a big difference.
There is a claim that Bibi Netanyahu propped up and funded Hamas. Is that true or untrue?
Okay. So certainly allowed for Qatari monies and encouraged them to go in starting around 2018. That was the same time that Qatar was isolated in the Arab world for being pro-jihadi and damaging the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Those three countries wanted to overthrow the regime there. That was the understanding, beginning of 2017 already. Trump came into office and said no, and he went and visited the Gulf. Also, I think it was May 2017, just like now, May 2025. And he said, no, I don't want that. In the end, Qatar was brought in again as acceptable within the Arab world, the Arab League. And the moderates were quite unhappy about this because Qatar was undermining their countries, which are, Muslim and have plenty of extremists that, those countries are worried about. Netanyahu in 2018, when they still hadn't rejoined their diplomatic relations, I think that was only in 21, he brought them in and said, okay, you can support Hamas, give money, build all these things. But one, he had about $1.8 billion went in up until October 7th. Not only was it funding the population, but it's funding Hamas. Plus, there was a lot of smuggling, dual usage materials as well, cement, iron bars, pipes that all can be used for tunnels, or the pipes, you cut them down, you make rockets out of them. He allowed for it to happen. He encouraged that Qatar would keep putting money in there. What was the political objective? Political objective, okay, and one could agree with it or not.
What does it mean to encourage?
What's that?
What does it mean to encourage?
encouraged Qatar that they
Yeah.
should. He allowed for them tens of millions of dollars went in every month. And look, we don't know for sure. There's all these investigations going on, but my take on it is there's probably a lot more that, you just turn a blind eye and let it go in, because the idea was Qatar will keep it down. All right. They're going to have prosperity. On October 8th, we were supposed to give another, I think, 10 or 15,000 work permits in Israel for Gazans. It was going to help them financially, tremendously so.
Wow.
It was in the pipeline about to go. Okay. But if I go back to this.
This is not a theory that, again, conspiracy theories are saying that, Bibi wanted to prop up Hamas because he knew at some point we would have to go to war with them, and we would go to war with them, and then we would be able to then expand our borders.
Okay, so no, that's absolutely wrong. Nonsense conspiracy theory, because people like to spin things. It was much simpler than that. I'm going to go back to the greater land of Israel understanding.
Okay.
The right wing also accepted it, that Gaza was lost. But when you look at hardline right-wing government, the understanding was we don't want to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority. And the way to prevent that is to explain, look, there is no one representative of the Palestinians. You have Hamas in Gaza, and you have the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. And therefore, there's no one to talk to, because who do you speak to? So you strengthen Hamas as a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority, the more secular, whatever else. And there are plenty. Look, they're not pro-Israel or anything like that. There is some cooperation, right? They're considered very corrupt, but the idea is to keep them split. So then, you've managed. But as I said before, at the beginning of this discussion, you never cut deals with jihadis. They're not going to keep them.
Right.
And Yahya Sinwar is always clear about that. He was in Israeli jails for 22 years. He taught Quran, the Hamas covenant. He taught jihad all the time and led the prayer sessions or whatever. And he did the same thing when he got back to Gaza. So it's there. It's criminal negligence, if you want, or it's such a wrong-minded policy. And it's not like it's the first time it happened. There are plenty of others who cut deals with jihadis and it blew up in their faces. The biggest one being the West in Afghanistan against the Russians.
Mm.
From there, you have all the different factions that go off to other countries and set up jihadi terror cells from Afghanistan onwards, right? The 1980s. Attempts to cut deals with the Iranians, right? Also, Iran-Contra, but also other things that Reagan did. Reagan was a conservative. Obama. All right, here, it really get me into a tirade. He figured Erdogan is going to have Islamic democracy, and just like you have Christian democratic parties in Europe, you'll have Muslim democratic parties. Right. Erdogan said, he made it very clear. We was asked about democracy. Democracy is a trolley you get on and you get off at your stop. You get as far as you go and you get off at your stop, and then you deal with it. And he's an incremental one. And that's where the West falls into.
I don't get it. What is it about us in the West that we don't believe what they say?
We're reflexive, because our politicians, I don't want to say what they're full of, okay? But our politicians say one thing and do another when they get the power. Jihadis say what they mean what they say, and do it. And for a Western saying, but how do you ever succeed as a politician if you do that? And their answer is, if we don't get it through persuasion, we're going to get it through coercion with the fist. And it works because we did it for 1,000 years, on and off, of course, but it worked.
Right.
Okay, they're looking back at a glorious history of conquest. In the West, let's remember, Western democracy is very young, and we're reflexive, as I said before. Well, we behave that way, so they should. For sure they do. I mean, they are reasonable. The other thing is Western hubris. We're conceited. We think everybody thinks like us. So especially people who are liberal, well, they got to think like I do. Because people who are very liberal and open-minded, unfortunately, it seeps in that they think everybody's that way. And that is conceit. That is conceit. As liberal as you are, I'd say the true liberal understands that not everybody thinks like he or she does, and holds on to your values and says, wait a minute, as we say in Hebrew, Adkan, up to here. That's my red line. My red line is when you threaten me and threaten my democracy, because democracy's first responsibility is to defend itself. So call it 98% is all open. But there's that 2%, right? This is incitement, right? You have to stop it. We say in Hebrew, La rogo tam shem ktanim. You kill it off when they're little, not when it blows up in your face.
Izzy, what do you think about our hostage policy and negotiating for hostages and how we negotiate for hostages, how we release so many prisoners for, maybe one hostage or two hostages or five hostages to, I don't know, 1,000 prisoners? Do you believe that it just encourages them to continue to take hostages? And how do we deal with this? Because on one end, I feel like the negotiation is so bad, like the trade-off of how many prisoners we give over for our hostages. But on the other hand, it's very much Jewish of us. We care about our people, we care about life, and we want our people back. But what does that mean for the security of our country? What does that mean for the security of Israel and feeling safe, knowing that we're releasing so many prisoners, such as Sinwar? He was someone that we released in a deal, and he, orchestrated October 7th. So what is your take on our hostage policy?
Okay. So it's very problematic because we don't have the same values as the other side. The other side makes it very clear. We worship death and you worship life, and therefore we will win. Now, I'm not giving up, and I don't think you would either, on our values. Hence, what happens, because of the security issue, we start making compromises. It's not like we say, anything you want, but when they start bringing numbers, so you start negotiating over numbers. How much is one Israeli hostage? Or by the way, there were foreigners there, and it's not just a matter of being Jewish, right? We had Muslims who were held, and Israeli Bedouin, right? So how much is it worth? And you start coming down with the numbers, and it's a fallback position. We don't really have a choice unless we want to give up on our values. Now, what did happen was with Gilad Shalit, the original negotiations spoke of a lot less numbers. And it didn't work out in the end. Okay, it was under Ehud Olmert. Netanyahu came into power, and he released 1,027 for one of our soldiers. Now, you can argue it was right, it was wrong, morally right, but certainly when you take the big picture, yes, it was Sinwar, and amongst those other 1,000, you had lots of those who ended up in command positions and are, diehard jihadis. So I would say it's an extremely difficult position that we're in. There have been those, and I'm talking about people from the right, who have said, look, I think it was Tzvi Cheskeli, from reporter, but also investigative reporter. He knows jihad and Islam backwards and forwards, okay? He's of the Iraqi Jewish background. And he said something like one time, you know what? At the beginning, we should have said, full deal. You give us everything, all our hostages back. We'll give you more, whatever we want. Then we get ready for a war. We're going to go in there, and that's going to be the end of it. He may, if I remember correctly, and I may not be saying it 100% correctly, but the idea was, and there were others also who said maybe that was what to do, but that's only, after it happened and policies were otherwise. So what I believe is that we've gotten to a point, military pressure is not going to do it. There are still tens of miles of tunnels all over the place. To find them, a needle in a haystack. And therefore, we're going to have to come to some sort of pause or hudna that they'll think is on their terms. We have to make it on our terms and make sure that all the humanitarian aid comes through the West, through Israel, not through complicit UN types of organizations. I mean, they can work with the Americans and Israel now, but they're not at the top. And that you take away the authority from Hamas on the civil administrative level. They have nothing to give. Supporting Hamas doesn't do anybody any good. And if they start ripping off the supplies, so the population will turn against them. Problem is the population is not armed, and they are. Whoever has a sticker on the trigger is the one who calls the shots. But little by little, they'll lose it. And that's the idea, to bring about a rebellion. And that should have been done a long time ago. When I said the war should have ended, we've been in and out all sorts of places through the entire Gaza Strip. I believe we could have done this something like, I think, last summer.
Wow.
By then we could have, or certainly in the fall, and it wasn't done. And once again, we go back to the whole political issue, okay, which is very unfortunate. I don't believe politics should be playing a role here.
Izzy, this Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian conflict seems as though it will never end, and it seems like there's no solution to it, that we only have peace for a little bit, then we'll have war again, and then peace for a little bit, and more war again. Are there any examples in history that you can think of that is as similar to the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, like really similar, that ended and that we could draw hope from?
Okay, so my answer is yes.
Okay.
I do believe we can. And as was pointed out, you notice Israeli Arabs during the entire conflict have kept everything very quiet. They were humiliated about what happened on October 7th, and a lot of them are quite angry, enraged over what has happened since then with Israel's, incursion. In other words, at the beginning they were okay, but with things that have happened recently, they're very angry. So are quite a few, a good amount of Israeli Jews. But if you look at the level of how many people support jihad in the Muslim community in Israel, I think the percentage is maybe 1%.
Okay, that's
what's
good.
happened has been a West. If I remember correctly, I read stuff sometimes, a bit confusing, but they are not for it. They know what it is to get along. They know what freedom of religion is. The Ministry of Religious Affairs builds mosques, pays imams, pays qadis, right? Their judicial system. Internally, Sharia law laws are being implemented, just like halakha with Judaism, or the Christians and their laws, or the Druze. So there's religious freedom, and they get money from the government. The other thing is there's economic prosperity. So not necessarily, it's not going to buy somebody off, but to say, wait a minute, it's a lot better to live like this and follow my holidays. I don't have to have an active jihad of any sort. Right. I don't know if people are saying we're nullifying, I don't want that, or saying that'll be off in some very distant future, 100, 200, 300 years from now. I don't know. But when you look at it, that certainly is one. Two, other conflicts have ended with what's called total victory. Now, I don't believe there can be a total victory, because the Palestinians are a part of a much larger Arab world. There has to be a rapprochement with the Arab Islamic world. And that's where I go back to this whole abrogation understanding. But it can certainly start with those in Gaza, because now you have a chance to rebuild the whole thing, just like the Americans did after World War II in Imperial Japan or in Nazi Germany. They said, this is over. We are done with these ideals. I remember there it was ideals. In Japan, Shintoism was religion. Germany was building a religion. They said, it's enough. Look at the wreckage you brought on yourself. Degrade, destroy, and now that is pretty delegitimized, what you believe in. Doesn't mean you have to give up your identity, but there are aspects of it that are far too extreme. And I believe that the West has to get in here, along with, call it a moderation of many, Israelis who are furious at everything that has happened. So, you start to bunker in, say, okay, we have to have outreach and say, we are changing this situation, right? We're changing it. You guys need security. We'll make sure it's security. It can be us, it can be others, but in the meantime, you're going to learn this differently. Remember, in Gaza for 17 years, 16 years, 2007 till 2023, they were taught jihadism. Hitler taught Nazism from 1933 to 39 in 6 years in the schools, and the kids who ended up in the army and whatever. And look what happened.
Right.
Japan also wasn't so long. Yes, it's part of some aspects of Shintoism. I'm not going to get into it. It's not my expertise. But they had all those years. They had 16 years. Now we have to undo this. And I think Gazans are ripe for that, as well as in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. There's also been a low-intensity conflict. We don't pay that much attention to it. In Israel, we do. And the school system has to be changed there as well. because there are plenty of pro-Hamas supporters, whatever else, enough, and to bring economic prosperity at the same time. That's where, yes, the Americans and Europeans come in, but at the same time, no more. Anybody who's involved with supporting jihad, and here I use Qatar and Turkey, you're out of the picture. You're not part of this.
Izzy, last question. Do you believe Jews are safer in Israel or the United States?
Somehow or another, I knew we were going to get to something like this. Okay, look.
Gotta leave it with a bang.
Well, okay, I'll start off by saying where things are really disastrous. Just like, Canada, who would have expected what's going on there, the United Kingdom, right, Britain, and Australia. I mean, it's unbelievable. America, I think, is different. I think that Jews are fairly safe in America, not as safe as when I grew up or even 2 years ago before October 7th, because of this explosion of jihadi understandings along with the Red Alliance. And that's where the real danger is, because those supporting the Reds don't know what the jihadi agenda is.
What do you think they should start to be thinking about Aliyah to Israel?
Okay, so I would say physically, we are safer here in many cases, but let's remember, someone goes to the army or there have been
Israel,
right? Israel. There have been attacks. In other words, if you think about the amount of Israelis who have died in the last 19, 20 months compared to the amount of American Jews, so the number is much higher here. So America still is certainly safe if we look at it like that. But if there's a crescendo of rising anti-Semitism, then someone could feel like, okay, you become an out-group. And that's the first step in not feeling not safe at all or not feeling you can express yourself. It's not necessarily of just physical safety, but feeling safe in your being and who you are and what you want to express. So I would say both places, right? We both have our issues and our problems, and I think we have to strengthen each other, very much so. And there are Israelis in America, and there are, Anglos, as we call ourselves, right, here in Israel. And I believe
you support the Jews wherever they want to live.
Yeah, wherever they want to live. But I would say, look,
for Aliyah.
Well, look, I was always pressing for Aliyah. I did it 48 years ago. But I would say people like, if you're in Ireland, Norway, Spain, Jews living there, I would say, yes, it's dangerous. France has its issues, Belgium for sure, right? Whereas I think America is probably, of all the countries that, not Israel, is probably the safest. A lot of people there that are pro-Israel and onwards. The issue is with the younger generation. They are very ignorant. They don't read primary source material. They're on the Instagram and TikTok and all the sort of stuff. And they're not digging down. How many have read their, New Testament, Old Testament, Quran, and, or just primary source material? Hamas Covenant, PLO Charter, Israel Declaration of Independence, right? You're getting into this whole issue, or just a simple history. Simple history, right? An overview.
Yeah. Izzy, can you tell my viewers about your academy and the courses that you offer and how they can have access to reading these primary sources and educating themselves and learning more?
Okay, so we set up the Neeman Academy, and after October 7th, the question was, what do we do? So I went and ran off and worked a bit in agriculture here and there, go back to my youthful days on a kibbutz. But then I realized I have to do something a lot more serious. And I had some people telling me, go for it, whatever. And I was not used to all this like social media stuff. I thought it was towards retirement. So what we decided to do is, okay, I have all this knowledge. I have all these PowerPoints I put up, that we would put them into courses in Canva and whatever else. And I'll really improve them and do more research. And the first course was Exposing Islamic Jihad. It was 24 parts. But then I was told, pare it back a bit. So we made it 12 parts, which actually turned out to be 13. And that's being offered as of June 19th. We already had one semester started in the end of March. And then, of course, alongside was the issue of anti-Semitism, the history of anti-Semitism. So made it into a mini course for the summer, expand upon it later, have six parts going from what's called From Pharaoh to Facebook. and to show how it evolved and how it's all connected. And the two are connected, as we just discussed, right, with the Red-Green Alliance. But it's not only that, right? We know you have that fascist aspect as well. But those are two different courses of which there is some overlap. And we go into primary source material, quotes from leaders, whether they be, Islamic leaders and jihadis or certain anti-Semites in history or those who oppose them, and quotes from theology. We take primary source material like from the Quran or from the Hadiths.
And all of these courses are offered online?
Yes, those two will be online. And in the fall, I'm planning on building a course called Israel, a Miracle. All right. Who would have thought after 2,000 years that the Jewish people scattered all over the world were going to come home? If I was to give people, go to Las Vegas, you're in the year 1880 something, put down a bet, are the Jews going to have a state? I think right there, you crazy. They would give you no odds, right? I say there's no way. Okay. So it is, right? Think about it. Reconstituted ourselves together, gathered from over 100 countries around the world in the land of Israel. So that we're going to have in the fall. The point is, we learn every 2 weeks. We have lives where I'm on Zoom and we ask questions and we build community. And people have questions. How do I answer this? And how do I do that? And this is going on in my community. And we work on it. Sometimes I'm asked to research to find some info to give them. We have an ebook on anti-Semitism put out. We'll have one on Islamic jihad. And this will be, and by the way, you don't have to take the course to get that. You go into Neeman Academy. Just go in, www.Neeman Academy. Go in, look around. We'd love to have everybody in our classes. Certainly take whatever's out there. We have, classes that are just uploaded, for the general public, anybody, and learn with us. I think it would be a great opportunity. And also building community. And some people have been feeling alone because of what's been going on. Now they feel, wow, I have, backing of help. Okay.
Yeah. Izzy, thank you so much for coming on the Black and Jewish podcast. This has been so insightful as always. As I always like to tell everyone, Yisrael Neeman is like a walking encyclopedia, and I'm like, my mind is always blown every time I speak with you. So I just thank you for your time and the information that you always share and how you're able to put things into perspective for us to easily consume and understand. So thank you so much for coming on my podcast today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking, discussing, and I'm greatly honored to be on the podcast. And I wish you and all of your viewers, listeners, all the best. And hopefully, it'll all work out and continue in a positive direction.
Amen. Okay. Well, that is a wrap on this week's episode of the Black and Jewish podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, share this video. If you're listening by audio, share it with your friends. Really take initiative to try and read primary sources. And I encourage you all to sign up for the courses offered by Neeman Academy. And that's spelled Neeman academy.com. And really dive into what is jihad and the Quran and learning more about the Hamas Charter. Arming yourself with information and education will help you to be a better advocate, activist, or help your community better in how to protect yourselves with information and defend yourselves with education and information as we Jews navigate wherever we are, whether that be the United States, Israel, Canada, or, Europe. I will see you guys next week. Thank you for being here. Bye for now.